well. My name is Adriana Hochberg. I'm the acting director in the Department of Environmental Protection, and I also serve as the county's climate change officer. I want to welcome everyone to the launch of Montgomery County's Electric Vehicle Purchasing Co-op pilot program. The EV Purchasing Co-op is designed to help us move forward faster towards our county's climate action plan goal of 80% reduction in emissions by 2027 and 100% elimination of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. With today's launch, we're ready to lead the EV charge. In this phase of our pilot program, we're asking residents and businesses to sign a pledge that will serve as a foundation for the purchasing cooperative. The co-op will seek to negotiate favorable pricing for EV purchases and leases on behalf of those who have taken the pledge. We will be coordinating with local dealers and other businesses to offer incentives to go EV and hope to add more partners with perks along the way. This is an important step to encourage and incentivize residents and businesses to move toward purchasing electric vehicles. The county is already moving forward in this direction, having started the switch to a zero emissions bus fleet. This work is led by the Montgomery County Department of Transportation under the leadership of Director Chris Conklin, who is with us here today. Chris?
Thanks, Adriana. The county's been working with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments on a car purchasing co-op for residences and businesses to use our collective buying power as a county to get incentives for purchasing electric cars. Other jurisdictions in our area are looking to replicate this program as we lead the charge for electric vehicles in the region. I'm so thankful to see so much enthusiasm and support for this program because nationally, transportation is the second leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, responsible for 29% of all emissions. It's second only to residential and building energy use. In Montgomery County, transportation makes up an even greater percent of our emissions, 40% of the total. As part of the County Executive's Climate Action Plan, MCDOT has committed to a zero emissions bus fleet by 2035, replacing nearly 400 diesel fuel buses. We currently have 4 electric buses in operation and have paid for and ordered 10 more and budgeted for 30 more over the next 2 fiscal years. This will bring the electric vehicle fleet up to 44 by 2023. Transitioning 44 buses from diesel to electric will reduce the lifetime emissions by 155,000 tons of greenhouse gas. We are leading by example, but know that the choices our residents and businesses make will have the largest impact on our environment. It's critical that we increase our use of transit, biking, walking, and other micro-mobility options for as many trips as possible. But we know that for some types of trips, travel by car will continue to be necessary in the choice that our residents and businesses make. The most impactful change in emissions for these trips is going to come from switching to zero emissions vehicles. Single occupancy vehicles still make up the bulk of greenhouse gas emissions, producing about 2/3 of the total emissions for the transportation category. That's why this program and continued support for zero emissions infrastructure is so important. We're lucky to have a county executive that understands the impacts of climate change from transportation and makes programs like this that allow our residents to contribute to our future a top priority. With that, I'd like to introduce County Executive Mark Eldridge.
Thank you. I'm going to start by thanking our, excuse me, still recovering from COVID. I want to start by thanking our Montgomery County-based auto dealers who've committed to be electrified dealers in the EVPC pilot program. And we couldn't do this without them. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, the EVADC, and Poolsville Green for their partnership and engagement in advancing EVs in our region. I couldn't be prouder to be with you today as we address this climate change action. Since 2018, we've addressed a variety of pressing priorities in our community. As I've said before, if it weren't for the pandemic, climate change would be the #1 crisis facing our county, our nation, and our planet. And as Adriana mentioned, leading the way in addressing climate change is Montgomery County's Climate Action Plan, which calls for an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2027 and 100% by 2035. To achieve these goals, we need to transition our transportation system away from fossil fuels. And we can't do this without the residents of our county. so much, whether it's, transportation or home heating, whether it's in commercial buildings or residential buildings, so much of the decisions we have to make are not decisions the government can make by itself, but in choices that individual consumers need to make. And so if we're going to get there, we have to get there together. And our role in the county is to try to make it easier to transition to electric vehicles. We're doing what we're doing now in Montgomery County with EV buses for our transit and school bus fleet, new EVs for the county vehicles, and adding more EV charging stations in our parking garages is an important part of moving us to the next phase. To expand this effort today, I'm pleased to announce the launch of a new initiative that will help us move faster toward widespread use of zero emission vehicles, the pilot phase of Montgomery County Electric Vehicle Purchasing Cooperative, or EVPC. Through this program, Montgomery County aims to make it easier for our residents and businesses to adopt EV technology and reap the benefits, including lower operating costs and, of course, lower emissions. And this is something I can, attest to personally, because I went from what was a pretty efficient gas burning vehicle to an electric vehicle. And though the electric vehicle cost a little bit more in terms of the monthly lease, the savings I experienced between the fuel costs of the EV versus the fuel costs of my gas vehicle actually made the EV a better buy. And it's one of the things we've kind of learned about, buses, that if you look at the 10-year cycle of bus use, a diesel bus may be cheaper than an electric vehicle, but by the time you factor in maintenance and fuel costs, electric vehicles win. It's true for them, and it's true for residents as well. I'm challenging the residents and businesses in Montgomery County to pledge that their next vehicle will be a new or pre-owned electric vehicle. Through this program, I've set a goal of 1,000 Montgomery County residents and 50 businesses who will take the EV pledge this year. Community members and businesses who take the pledge will help demonstrate demand for electric vehicles here in Montgomery County, and they'll be sending a signal to the market that we're ready to lead the EV charge. This show of support will also serve as the foundation for a full-scale EV purchasing cooperative, where the county will work with auto manufacturers and dealers to negotiate favorable pricing for EV purchases and leases on behalf of community members who've taken the pledge. In this pilot phase of the EVPC, we will provide information resources for our customers, EV training for vehicle sales staff, and support for what we are calling the electrified dealers, and an EV ambassador program that allows EV owners to share their experiences with prospective buyers. And I have to say this last one is really important, because the best salespeople for a program like this are people who've made the transition to electric vehicles and can actually talk about their experiences. All the information on the EVPC pilot program is on our zero emission vehicle website, montgomerycountymd.gov ZEV. This is where people can take the EV pledge and invite friends, neighbors, and local businesses to take the pledge as well. We can lead the charge in EV in Montgomery County to make sure we reach our goal of zero emissions. That's our goal. That's what we'll be working on.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. I want to let members of the press know that at the end of the presentations, there will be time for Q&A. So if anybody from the press has questions, you can let us know in the chat and we'll call on you in that order. It is now my pleasure to introduce Joyce Briner, the co-founder and executive director of Poolsville Green, an organization that educates the community about sustainable living, emphasizing renewable energy, EV adoption, and energy efficiency. A climate change professional and an EV owner whose rooftop solar provides 100% of her household's electricity needs, Joyce also advises various sustainability boards and was a member of the county's Climate Action Planning Transportation Work Group. Joyce is also one of the leading organizers of the annual Poolsville Day EV Showcase, the world's largest display of owner-operated EVs associated with National Drive Electric Week. Joyce, take it away.
Thanks, Adriana, and County Executive Eldridge for having me here today, and to all involved in working to bring this program to fruition. As Adriana mentioned, over the past 10 years, Poolsville Green has been educating the public about sustainable living practices to reduce the carbon footprint of families. And one of the areas we focus on is EV adoption. We started small with just 3 EVs in a single event, and that has grown exponentially over the decade. Throughout the time, we've been thrilled to partner with Montgomery County in getting the EV message out to the community, and we are even more excited about moving into this expanded phase with the EV Pledge and Cooperative Purchasing Pilot Program. We'll be at a number of outreach events throughout the spring, with events already scheduled in February, March, and April, and wouldn't be surprised to see even more. We look forward to bringing EV enthusiasts together with the EV curious. It's important to note that Poolsville Green couldn't do this without the help of the EV owning pioneers in our county and throughout the region, many of whom are part of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C. These folks, along with Friends of Poolsville Green, all coming from a diverse cross-section of the greater population, freely volunteer their time and real-world experience to educate the public about the EV owning lifestyle. These EV enthusiasts, as with most EV owner groups from my perspective, have created an enthusiastic community I'm proud to be a part of, both in reality and through social media. Poolsville Green is proud to be a partner in this programming, and we're thrilled to be a part of today's launch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. The automotive industry knows that EV adoption is critical to eliminating transportation emissions, and we cannot be successful in this endeavor without the support of the automotive industry and our local automotive dealers. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce John O'Donnell, who's President and CEO of the Washington Area New Automobile Dealers Association. And I believe John's mic is muted.
Am I ready to go? Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm very sorry that I'm a few moments late. We're in the middle of our public policy press day here at the Washington, D.C. Auto Show. In fact, I'm standing right next to our electric vehicle pavilion. And Gina McCarthy, the White House climate advisor, is going to be making remarks very shortly. So, but I'd love to talk about the EV purchasing cooperative in Montgomery County. Are there any questions before I begin? So the car dealers around Washington, D.C. and nationwide, frankly, are excited to sell electric vehicles. We have a great number of vehicles here at the auto show from all different manufacturers. So it's no longer just Tesla, which was largely a high-end vehicle, I guess a high price point. Price points are coming down. They're becoming more accessible for the average consumer. And we're happy to work with Mr. Eldridge and the county to establish this electric vehicle purchasing cooperative. I know it's been successful in other areas, and it's certainly going to be successful here. We have a few issues, as everybody knows, with semiconductor chips causing a shortage of vehicles around the region, around the globe, to be honest. We expect that to normalize within 6 to 9 months, depending upon the manufacturer. But I'm hoping you can see some of the vehicles, even the exotics, are getting into electric vehicle space with McLaren, Karma, and Bentley actually providing electrification for cars that we probably won't be purchasing by the average person anyway. So I'd love to take questions. By the way, we have an electric vehicle pavilion as well as an outdoor ride and drive. So if somebody is interested in riding an electric vehicle and doing a little shopping, please come down to the convention center here in Washington, D.C. and take a spin. With that, I will conclude our remarks, or my remarks, and field any questions. By the way, behind me, you can see an electric vehicle bus. So we're getting into all the different modalities. personal transportation, mass transportation, on-road, off-road. It'll all be electric very soon. And
Thank you
thanks
so
very
much.
much for your time.
Thank you so much, John, for joining us today in what is in the middle of a very busy day for you. I'd like to now open up the discussion to Q&A, starting with any questions that we may have from members of the press. I also wanted to share that here on the line with us today, we have several partners who are supporting the rollout of our electric vehicle purchasing co-op. They're members of the Electrification Coalition who are here to help answer any questions. Let's see. I see that Steve Bonnell from Bethesda Beat has some questions. I think you are the first one from the press with questions. So Steve, go ahead. I believe you're able to unmute yourself to ask your question.
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. A simple question to start off here, just about how this co-op is going to work. Is it just pretty much that you enter this co-op and the county kind of helps with kind of the purchasing process? I know you kind of described the process already, but I'm just curious from kind of a basic logistical standpoint, how this will help people in the county save money, which is obviously your objective. And I don't know if Chris or anyone else can kind of field that, but.
Sure. I'll go ahead and turn things over to Matt Stevens-Rich from the Electrification Coalition to help answer that question.
Yeah, great question, Steve, and good to be with everyone this morning. Quick intro, I'm Matt Stevens-Rich, Program Manager with the Electrification Coalition, joined with a number of our other team members. Our role here is helping with the implementation and crafting of the cooperative. The EC is a national nonprofit, so we are actually based in DC and have staff that are on this call that actually live in the county, but we work nationally across a variety of consumer adoption programs. Where all this programming really stems from is the importance of consumer adoption and engagement, especially looking at how you can work with community members and dealers as partnership there. So we've actually had a lot of success. Our work actually goes back over a decade now. The very first style of this program we launched was called Drive Electric Northern Colorado, where we indeed worked with dealers and community stakeholders in Fort Collins, Colorado, if you'll believe it, where focus was just the same on creating easy ways for residents and businesses and organizations to engage and experience electrification, and also be able to work with dealers to create new incentives and benefits as well. So we have taken a lot of that element and thematic and rolled that forward. So what you'll be experiencing over the coming days, weeks, months of this program is, for lack of a better term, a consumer engagement campaign, where we're going to be using a variety of engagement tactics to make easy access to electrification information, get to experience them at ride and drives and other types of events, such as the auto show. And indeed, we do have a dealership engagement program. We already have a number of committed dealers. You'll be able to find all this information on the Montgomery County website, which will continue to keep updated and rolling as we continue to work that engagement through. But really what this looks like on a day-to-day basis for you as the resident or the business or organization is continuing engagement on social media, in-person engagements as we're able to navigate that and in the pandemic times that we're in, but just creating those ways that we can make it easier to get information and education. A big thing to emphasize here is very rarely are consumers and residents making a last-minute decision to purchase a vehicle. Often it's a journey process where you're planning this out months in advance. So recognizing that we have a number of these different touch points that we really want to be able to hit with really everyone involved here, where we can be sure they're getting information as quickly as possible and be a part of that process.
You mentioned the incentives, and it might be on the website, like you said, but are those tax credits, what incentives when it comes to consumer, just from a practical standpoint, what does that look like?
Yeah, so indeed, we do have access to a number of incentives already through, such as the federal tax credit. There's also utility-based incentives too, which are great. And we will be opening up the avenue, working with our dealer partners, such as through preferential financing and other types of benefits and incentives. In general, while there is some limitations around current market supply, we're also looking at working with our manufacturer partners. So, and without going too far into the entire supply chain weeds, there's really a number of different partners we work with, both the local dealers and being sure they have all the knowledge and engagement basis to work with getting electric vehicles into the community, but also working with our manufacturer partners, being sure we can have priority supply coming to Montgomery County region. Those who may have followed the news, you see these commitments every day on ramping up electrification for manufacturers. So in turn, it's being sure we can have access to that supply. Used vehicles, for example, is another avenue too. Really, at the end of the day, dealers are such a careful partner here, as they're the ones who are quite literally closing the sale. And so it is being sure they have all the access and resource and know-how to be able to engage with customers and consumers from everything from what's the best electric vehicle option for me, how do I do charging at home, those types of resources that we do already have live on the website and will continue to keep updated over the coming months.
This one might be for Mr. Conklin and the county executive, but is there any, I guess, goal in terms of, a lot of this is human behavior in the private sector and people shifting to electric vehicles, but have you put kind of a number or at least some sort of metric that you consider that once this co-op gets running, if we hit this kind of mark or this kind of metric, this will be successful, I guess?
Mr. County Executive, do you want to say anything, or I have something I can say if you don't?
You can start.
I mean, our climate action goal is to get to zero emissions by 2035. So that requires that by the time we get to 2035, all of the private vehicle fleet operating in the county is operating in a zero emissions way. And right now, the pathway to zero emissions is through electric vehicles. So obviously we need some behavior change in terms of walking, biking more, using transit as much as possible, which will get to zero emissions as quickly as we can on that same timeline. But if you continue to use a personal vehicle, which I expect many people will, that vehicle needs to be zero emissions. There may be other zero emission type vehicles available at some point between now and 2035. But as we start out on this in 2022, the pathway is electric vehicles, and that's the intent of this program. So I don't know that we've set intermediate milestones on the degree of adoption of EV between now and 2035, but we need to get to 100% by then.
So I'll just add, we don't control this entire equation, and a huge part of the equation is actually controlled by the manufacturers. And I know what we're seeing is all the manufacturers, or at least most of them, actually shortening their timeline to electric vehicles. I know when we first started talking about this, people were like, well, yeah, there'll be electric vehicles by the end of the 2020s, and maybe by 2020 or 2045, the industry will catch on. But we're talking about companies now who are talking about major changes in their fleets by 2025. Some maybe 2030, and it's important because a gas-powered car has limited life. And so you may have legacy vehicles around for a while, but the sooner the industry switches over, the fewer gas vehicles we're going to have on the road that we have to wait for them to retire from natural causes. Hopefully other incentives will, drive the EV industry forward. It really, it's approaching the point where it makes sense for most people to go EV rather than going with a gas vehicle. The big missing piece of it is EV vehicles at the lower end of the price spectrum. I mean, that's the challenge. But a lot of those folks, who are buying these cars in a more urban environment, it may be possible to build cars that are more fit for urban transportation, which would be a little further diversification of the vehicle fleet that are both easier to electrify and cheaper to electrify. So I think we'll get a boost out of this from some of what actually happens with the industry, because they seem to be waking up to the fact that this has to change.
I don't know if John's still on the call. He hinted at this already, but about the supply chain issues, especially in the used car market. And I was wondering if he's on, if he could expand on, he said within 6 to 9 months that might regulate, and what he's heard that kind of leads him to suspect that, if he's still on here.
Steve, it looks like he may have had to drop off already.
Okay. I have one more question. Thanks for your patience, everyone. It's actually for Director Conklin, and it's kind of a curveball. Metro Now put out this report about bus service across the region, and including Montgomery County. I don't know if you got a chance to skim that yet, but it commended the county kind of for flash bus service and kind of the low fare to free fares on Ride On. I just want to get your reaction to that, if you've seen it or just, even skimmed it. That was kind of a big report that's been put out by this coalition of a bunch of organizations. So while I had you here, I figured I'd ask you about that.
I've seen it. I haven't had a chance to read it in detail. We're obviously happy to have launched the flash service and continued fare-free service up through this point. I look forward, I think they have a work session in a week or two. So I look forward to understanding more of their report by then. I would mention that the county executive has recommended major expansions of the BRT network and moving additional projects through design and into construction in the capital program that was released earlier this week. So we are continuing to try to improve the transit options in line with the recommendations of the Metro Now group, and are also doing a system redesign study called Ride On Reimagined, that we had public input on the scoping headed into the winter, and are going to be beginning the public engagement and technical work on that assessment of our entire transit system as we get further into the winter and into the spring of this year. So transit's a big part of our future, a big part of achieving our climate action goals and making it more accessible and reliable and meet more of the trip purposes that our people have is an important part of this. So I'm excited about that. And the whole region needs to move in that direction if we're to achieve our goals. So I look forward to diving into that report you mentioned in more detail to understand their recommendations and their status report on implementation of the bus transformation recommendations from a couple years ago.
The Ride On Reimagined study, do you know roughly when that, I know it's in progress, when that might be done?
It's going to be about an 18-month study effort because there's a great deal of need to get in touch with our residents and understand the needs of the system. So you'll be seeing more information on the public outreach and engagement components of that in the next few weeks because we're looking to get that underway really this spring.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the media for their patience with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I would like to take a moment to recognize that Vicky Garcia is with us this moment. She's from Congressman Sarbanes' office. If there are other electeds that are represented here on the call, if you'd like to indicate that in the chat, feel free to do so. The next question that we have from a member of the press is from Katara Jones from Prince George's County TV. Katara, I know you put your question in the chat, but if you'd like to take a moment to unmute and ask the question, you can feel free to do so. You may still be muted, or you may have opted not to ask the question, which is fine. The question that you posed in the chat, I'm just trying to pull it up here. Why was it important to create this pledge? So I can take a first stab at that and then open it up to other county colleagues who'd like to add on to it. What I would say is this is all about the power of numbers. The county has had a solar cooperative operating here for the last several years. And by having many county residents participating jointly, it helps to bring down the cost for everybody to install the solar panels. And so using that same model, this is what we're looking to do here with electric vehicles. It's a way to signal to the market that by having a lot of people interested at the very same time in purchasing an electric vehicle, the goal is to hopefully bring down the cost. But I'd like to open it up to any colleagues who would like to add to my answer.
I'll just say that the more people see their neighbors doing this, the more likely they are to do it. I mean, we all know that electric vehicles went through a period where they came out, but they invoked range anxiety. As somebody who had, like an early 2013 Leaf, I could tell people how great it was and economical to drive, but I also was vexed by how far I could drive. And when I tell people my limit, I kind of steered people away. When other people see that perfectly normal people, not people who are like dedicated, to cleaning up the environment and buying EVs, but just somebody who wants reliable, transportation. That those folks are making the decision now to buy these vehicles because they no longer have the range anxiety that they had before. That helps, I think, get other people comfortable with making that transition. I think any of us who've done this have probably had these conversations with our friends, and it's so much of it came down to range and and the other piece which we're going to be working on fixing, which is more charging stations around the county. If I can make charging stations more ubiquitous, that coupled with range improvements, I think is going to speed the transition.
And just to build on that, you're exactly right. These types of pledge moments, it also actually really helps us with how we engage and types of conversation that we have with dealers and manufacturer partners. These are numbers that do matter and do get paid attention to. And often the vernacular is squeaky wheel gets the grease, but so too by showing this type of market demand, especially in such a large metro region. This is a part of how we make that case for prioritizing vehicle options. And indeed, there's a lot of questions here too around, well, what's the benefits? What's the incentive on this types of co-op and doing this type of programming? And indeed, it really is actually showing the demand, and then that helps us then bring the supply in. It's already actually, as I alluded to, we have done this type of programming in the past. It's already been very outstanding at the number of community partners and dealers we've already been able to engage with. The tenor and tone is just distinctly different in the county. Folks are ready for this type of programming. They need this type of programming. The EVADC and other community partners on this call alone have already been so great to work with and connect with, and we're so excited to have them as an integral part to this. It's basically a way that we can really make sure the county is able to have an ever better address to how do we tackle transportation emissions, which, as I think was mentioned right out of the gate, largest source of emissions in the county. This is all collectively how we are able to go at those emissions and also make it easier to get at EV access for all.
And this is Sandy Brecker. I just want to add one more thing to what everyone said, and that is that one of the benefits is as well that this is a trusted source of information, a reliable source of information. There's a lot of misinformation that surrounds a lot of these issues with regard to EVs and other related factors of charging, et cetera. So what we're hoping to do is position ourselves as a trusted source of that type of information.
Right. And I think it was mentioned before also, or kind of hinted at, buying a vehicle is not like a snap decision. A lot of people take a lot of time to warm up to what kinds of models they want, what kinds of performance they need. And so we're starting this program again. We're really pushing like this community engagement and educational aspect because we want people, and it's okay for them to take time to make this decision, but we're providing all the resources. We're making the connections to ensure that when that time comes and when they're ready or when they're thinking about their next purchase, they can purchase confidently and they can be confident in the technology, and then they have a lot of resources to help them find an available dealer in their area and good deals and other supporting resources like where local charging stations are at, or what kind of rebates I should be inquiring about with my utility. This is forming that ecosystem that can help increase EV adoption in the near term, but also sets the foundation for a wide scale adoption in the long term.
We are very interested in having partner businesses provide additional incentives apart from just the direct incentives that might be available from the dealers and financial. And so, other kinds of perks, as we're calling them.
Yeah, so of course, electric vehicles, lower maintenance overall, but still some maintenance needed. So definitely trying to keep in touch with, again, not just the auto service industry that can supply these kinds of accessory perks to current and new electric vehicle drivers, but just other perks in the community. We want, this is as you can see from the excitement and like the engagement that we currently have with this launch, this this is an opportunity for businesses to demonstrate leadership in the community and commit themselves to like a clean energy economy and a green transportation system. So lots of opportunities for, again, not just directly like auto service or auto, not directly the auto supply chain, but other businesses as well.
Thank you, team, for providing a well-rounded answer to that question. The next question from the press is from Heather Curtis from WMAL Radio. Go ahead, Heather.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. I think this question may be best answered by Matt. You had mentioned supply chain issues, and given those, why pick now to roll out this program when vehicles of all kinds are difficult to get and used vehicles especially are more expensive?
Yeah, great question. Really, the thing to emphasize here is the pilot element of the programming. Overall, the county is really wanting to get the program formed and formulated. Indeed, it can sometimes take months, even years, to get this type of programming together. We've really been moving with swift action to get these different pieces and parts together. That way, it is essentially that way the county can be ahead of the curve in terms of that immediate access. The good news is there is indeed vehicles available. But in turn, we also just want to be sure the county is well poised as that vehicle availability continues to increase, that we're able to keep moving. It also, as has been alluded to here too, as we're using that terminology ecosystem, we're also trying to be sure we're expanding that horizon around charging access, around fleet electrification with businesses and organizations. So it's essentially a couple things of, if we wait to do this type of programming, we will be inherently behind the curve. So it is actually wanting to just be sure we have this programming up and running. And in turn, with this phase one, we're able to test out a couple different elements here and then continue to improve that as the months and year progresses.
Heather, did you have any additional questions?
I did. I'm not sure if this is best suited for Matt or for the county executive. County Executive Eldridge, you said while the monthly lease payment of your own electric vehicle was more expensive, the savings over time, because you're not using gas, has really made it less expensive. And I'm wondering what kinds of other incentives you can offer to people who may not be able to afford that higher price up front in order to, take advantage of the overall price difference.
I think, one of the things we're going to do is see what's in the federal bucket in terms of supporting programs you might want to run locally. It would be nice, to be able to provide some cash incentive or to help people buy the electric chargers that they're going to need, because you're going to want something. You're going to want a 240 volt charger, not to get into the weeds too much, rather than a 120, because the length of time it takes to charge these vehicles up, and the bigger the battery, the longer it is. So those are places where the county could be helpful. We could be helpful on the permitting for these things. And so we're going to explore where we can either expedite or where we can reduce costs for people. Some depends on our resources, and some we may be able to manage internally.
Thank you very much.
So this is a last call for any other questions from members of the press. If you have any questions, please ask them at this time. I have been trying to keep tabs of the chat. I know it's very active and lots of comments and questions in there from our residents. I really appreciate that. I'm not sure if we'll have time to get to all of those, but I wanted to open it up to any colleagues from the county and from the Electrification Coalition. If there's anything that you saw in the chat that you wanted to respond to here that we haven't already touched on, that would be helpful.
Adriana, there's a lot in the chat about EV charging. And there's a couple different avenues in which we're trying to improve that. In county parking facilities, we are working with Pepco to install additional charging stations there. The county is also competitively seeking providers to provide more charging at county facilities. So that's part of the puzzle, right? The other part is home charging. And there's a lot of chat here about installing and the ease of home charging if you own your own home and have off-street parking. And that is pretty easy. I've done that in 2 different houses myself. But last year we did issue a program to facilitate charging of EVs where people don't have their own parking. And that can be done if you have a house without a driveway or you otherwise face a public street. You can install a charging station there. And there was a comment about involving HOAs or community associations in that. And that would really be an excellent way to pursue this, because while we would let you install a charging station near your home, we wouldn't guarantee that somebody else isn't going to park there, particularly in neighborhoods where parking is scarce. So if there's a cooperative approach within neighborhoods, that would be a wonderful way to pursue that. But the charging is getting easier all the time, and hopefully that becomes less of a barrier. For me at this point, the barrier isn't charging anywhere near Montgomery County. It's charging when you're looking to go farther afield where maybe EV adoption is lower than it has been here.
Thank you, Chris. I did want to address a comment that I saw in the chat about, the fact that, transportation emissions are not our only source of emissions in the county. That is very true. The building sector is a large source of emissions as well. The energy, the grid as well. And that is why we have a climate action plan that touches across all of these various sectors and identifies actions to reduce emissions, across transportation, clean energy, buildings, as well as actions to help adapt the county to a changing climate. So I invite you to check out our climate action plan if you haven't seen it yet. We also have our fiscal year 22 climate work plan that outlines 75 near-term actions we're taking to address the climate emergency, of which launching this EV co-op program is one of those. And we can put some links in the chat to our climate plan and in the work plan as well.
Adriana, it's Sandy. I just want to address one question that was in the chat about new development and requirements for EV charging, and that is underway. There are some zones in which that is a requirement, and I think that is probably something we'll be working on to increase, the extent of those types of requirements. But we do already have that, and we're finding that many multi-unit and commercial buildings are very interested in installing EV charging, regardless of regulatory requirements, but in some cases the regulatory requirements are needed.
I'll come off mute, and as Lindsay Shaw and the team has been dropping in a couple hyperlinks, check out the website. We purposely did build it out with just a phenomenal list of resources. There's a lot of FAQ, for instance, it's been dropped in the chat that you'll actually find is answered on the website. We're driving folks to act on the pledge first. Again, it's a great way to really show support for the program, really dial into the programming we have coming out, but also in signing up for the pledge, you can sign up for our newsletter. We will continue to use that as well as social media as a way to keep residents, organizations, businesses in the loop, especially as new benefits, incentives, and dealers join the program. So continue to stick with the website. That's the great way where you can continue to dial into just new programming as we develop it and release it. There's also a email address dedicated on the webpage. You can ask and submit any other follow-up questions to, even as simple as where do I find charging or those types of things. Overall, we really want to be sure all these resources are just easier to access and consolidate together. So don't hesitate to reach out to the team.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We're so excited to launch the EV co-op purchasing pilot program today. Really hope that you take the pledge in the coming days, and we look forward to expanding and moving forward with the transition away from internal combustion engine vehicles in the county towards electric vehicle, towards more walking and biking, and towards more public transportation. So thanks again, and see you soon. Bye-bye.